All right, so this morning we are reading through Proverbs 8, looks like. So, starting with verse 10. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and I find knowledge and discretion. Fear of the Lord is hatred of evil, pride and arrogance and the way of evil, and perverted speech I hate. I have counsel and sound wisdom. I have insight. I have strength. By me kings reign, and rulers decree what is just. By me princes rule, and nobles, all who govern justly. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up, at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth. When there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth. Before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned the sea to its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command. When he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master workman, and daily I was his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. For whoever finds me finds life, and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who fails to find me injures himself, and all who hate me love death. This is God's word.
Thank you, Spencer. Never without incident. Welcome back to the Hyperlinks series here at Sojourn. This summer we're looking at passages and themes from the Gospels that reference something from the Old Testament, some concept or theme or story from the Old Testament, as a way of Jesus sort of saying, because you know about that, you can better understand what's happening right now, who I am, what I'm doing, who I'm being. But if it's difficult, because the people he was talking to were probably much more familiar with the things he was saying and the references he was making. And so for us, we have to take a moment, take some time, and look back at the Old Testament to gain that clarity, to gain a better understanding of what it is Jesus is actually saying to us, and who he's actually trying to be for us as well. This morning will be a little different. Instead of starting with the gospel passage and then shifting back to the Old Testament, we're going to start with an Old Testament theme, and then we're going to jump into the New Testament to see where Jesus sort of brings this up and references this concept and this reality of wisdom. And because I think if we start in the New Testament, it'll be a little harder to see because the passage is quite familiar for many people, and I think we don't typically associate the passage with wisdom. So I want to start here and then jump forward. So I hope that makes sense. We actually looked at this passage about 5 years ago, but I couldn't help return to it again this summer when we're looking at some of the more interesting hyperlinks. It's sort of a hidden one, and I enjoy those. I enjoy finding the jewels under the dirt, as it were. Not that the passage was dirt before. That's a bad analogy. They only work so far. But we'll begin with a general look at this theme of wisdom in the Old Testament. We're going to specifically look at this section of Proverbs because it carries a lot of information about wisdom itself. So we're going to look at that. And then we'll turn to Jesus, specifically in the Gospel of Matthew, and see his invitation to wisdom, maybe in a way we haven't seen before. So, but if you were here 5 years ago, then you probably saw this before. But let's take a look at this. Three points we're going to break this down under. First, defining wisdom. We're going to define what wisdom is and also what it isn't. That's probably also important to define as well. Secondly, we're going to look at our struggle, the struggle to be wise. And then we're going to look at this path to wisdom that Jesus kind of lays out for us, and we'll look at that before we're done. All right, we got a lot to cover. Let's get started. Let's reread verses 10 through 16 of chapter 8 of Proverbs. Verse 10. Here we go. Take my instruction instead of silver, and knowledge rather than choice gold. For wisdom is better than jewels, and all that you may desire cannot compare with her. I, wisdom, dwell with prudence, and I find knowledge and discretion. The fear of the Lord is hatred of evil, pride and arrogance in the way of evil, and perverted speech I hate. I have counsel and sound wisdom. I have insight, I have strength. By me kings reign, and rulers decree what is just. By me princes rule and nobles, all who govern justly. Okay. One issue I think that we can it may be difficult to determine is whether or not wisdom is a felt need in our culture. What I mean is, do people feel deeply a desire to be wise? And do they also sort of experience some, fear of missing out if they sense that they're not wise? I don't know if we do, on the whole, because I can see a couple other pursuits in our culture that seem to have replaced wisdom in many ways in our society. On one hand, there's a lot of people who want more information, more academic knowledge, but as I think we'll see, that's not exactly what the Bible means by wisdom. More information and facts is not what the Bible means by wisdom. And I can also see another group of people sort of pressing toward a desire to be morally right. And there appears to be this felt need to know what is right and wrong and moral, to be right. And there's a debate in that area, for sure. We fight about what's right and wrong all the time. We fight about, the pundits on TV talk all the time about what's right or wrong about gun rights or abortion or immigration, if you've been watching the news. But different groups have different moral imperatives, so it makes it difficult. The different standards on what actually is the right thing to do. But a group of people want to be right and not be wrong. And what I'm saying is just simply that I think we tend to, maybe I'm wrong, but I think, from what I see in my own life anyway, I think we tend to have a felt desire to be right more or to have more information. But neither of those things is wisdom as the Bible or the Old Testament defines it. Ancient cultures, who had very high levels of consensus about what is right and wrong. They didn't have those same debates necessarily like we do, not at the same level. They shared more of a consensus on what was morally right and wrong. They also shared more common knowledge. And out of that ancient culture of unified, or especially in Israel, a unified understanding of right and wrong, a unified understanding of basic knowledge, they say there's still more. Wisdom is more. And all cultures have known this, not just the Hebrew people. There is something beyond morality. There's something beyond right and wrong. There's something beyond just a directive from God. And cultures knew this. The Jewish people clearly knew it. Others did as well. And in many ways, morality is easier than wisdom, I think. We can often expand our rules of what is right and wrong to cover more than what God instructed, so we can feel like we're in the right. And this allows us to feel like we're living rightly, and we never have to bother with whether or not we're living wisely. It's easier to be right than it is to be wise. But on the other hand, the mere sort of secular approach to just getting facts and information, put this in some context. Think about raising kids. There's a secular sort of liberal approach that's all about gaining information so we can understand our kids, be more aware of the facts behind how they are raised and how they grow up. And if we gravitate toward those things, we understand them, we gain more information and knowledge in that regard, more scientific facts about their development and so forth, then our kids will be better off. But on the other hand, you have this legalistic conservative approach that will say, no, we need to raise them rightly. We need these morals and these standards about right and wrong and instill them in our children, and then our children will be better off. But But when you get to Proverbs, and it talks about raising kids, which we don't have time to get into this morning, but it's advocating for something that's not identical to just more information. And it's also not identical to moral goodness. It advocates for something called wisdom in the Old Testament, and it seems to imply that our lives, no matter how hard we try to be right or to have more information, our lives will still be a mess if we don't aim higher, if we don't aim for wisdom. And not just aim for something beyond for what our culture around us says we need. But I think this passage also that we just read says that we have to aim for something beyond what we even tell ourselves we need. Verse 11, all that you may desire cannot compare with her. So clearly, there's things that we will feel a need for beyond wisdom. We will feel a need, we will experience a need and a desire for something greater than wisdom. But that doesn't mean that what we desire is greater than wisdom. And this passage says specifically that wisdom is far more important than these great creature comforts, which is kind of what the implication of the gold and the silver and the jewels are all about. But wisdom, as I was brought up to understand it, was always connected to morality. To be wise is to do what's right. But wisdom biblically is not, as we said, not the same thing as morality. It's related to it, but it's not identical to it. To be immoral, to be unethical, is foolish in the long run. I think we could say that. Even best business practices will tell you that. You know, if be fair, be ethical, don't rip people off, don't lie. In the long run, it's better. If you do those things, it'll be more detrimental for your business later on. Obviously, wisdom is not being less than moral, but it's far more. So, for example, if you want to, you know, and I think this is something we've talked about at church, and we always are talking about these things, but what does it mean to help people out of poverty or difficult situations that they've found themselves in financially? That's a good thing. We're called to do that. That's a noble thing. That's a right thing. But we can do a completely morally right thing and still ruin someone's life because maybe we're not familiar with the complexities of how poverty actually works. Is this personal issues? Is this situational? Is this generational? Maybe we can teach them to fish, but maybe they don't have a housing option near a fish-filled water source, metaphorically speaking. It's not enough just to help people with a good moral vision. It's not enough to be people of principle. We have to be people of wisdom in the long run, or our life and the lives of other people around us, no matter how much we want to help, will not actually be as beneficial as it could be, and possibly even detrimental. And we run the risk of reducing problems that require wisdom down to a simple moral right or wrong, or just a simple, we just need some information. But wisdom will never encourage immorality. I'm not saying that, but it will always encourage something more than morality. And the other popular alternative to wisdom is the pursuit of information. And it's true that many decisions can be made in our life with just more information. If we had all the information, we could choose the right car, we could prescribe the right medicine, we could cook a recipe. You understand what I'm saying? But the vast majority of decisions we face, the rules don't apply, and more facts won't help. Should I buy a car or not? Who do I marry? Do I get married? Should I even pursue marriage? Who should I date? Should I break up with the person I'm currently dating? What career should I go into? What school should I go to? Should I stay in this town that I'm living in? Should I move to another town? Should I choose this job? Should I stay at the job that I have? Should I... Should I quit? These are questions that more information won't necessarily help. Should I confront this person? Should I not? Should I hold back and wait? Should I have this conversation now? Should I have this later? Should I let this go and not have this conversation at all? Should I take this risk in life, or should I play it safe? A wrong decision in any one of those areas could be completely a major disaster in our lives. It could completely derail us and send us into issues that we'll have to be working on for maybe even generations. But moral rules don't cover any of those things. And more information in most of these situations isn't enough. So I believe the reason often, at least in my life, and I'm assuming in yours too, is that the reason we often have this sick, sinking feeling in our stomach so often in our life is that because we know we're in situations we don't have the wisdom to deal with. More information isn't going to help us out, and there's no moral rule to apply. So, we may be turning to morality or legalism or more information and sort of that intellectualism to compensate for it, and I think we often do that. I've done that. I'm assuming you do too. I think we do that in our culture. But wisdom is better than comforts, and all that we desire will not compare with her. So what is it? What is wisdom? Because so far we've mostly just been saying what it's not. If we read the whole book of Proverbs, you'll see things, these phrases constantly come up, synonyms, other things that get swapped out for wisdom. There's a few of them here. Verse 12, I, wisdom, dwell with prudence. I find discretion, and so on. There's many Hebrew words that are used on and off throughout Proverbs that are sort of swapped out for wisdom, so we get broader understanding of what this means. In verse 14, there's one that gets swapped out a lot, which is insight. In verse 14, it's the word but it's essentially knowing how things really work. In verse 14, the word insight there, it's knowing how things should happen, how things should normally go, and how things really go, how things really happen. But the second one is this word prudence. In verse 12, I, wisdom, dwell with prudence. That's probably not a good English translation. But it means not being naive or gullible. It means not easily swept up. And there's also other rules or other words that are swapped out. You have this idea that there's an application that wisdom carries with it, something that produces action. Verses 15 and 16, we see this. By me kings reign and rulers decree what is just. So wisdom is this combination of three things throughout Proverbs that you can see, and throughout the Old Testament as a whole, really, but Proverbs gives us our most concise definition and picture. Wisdom is not just knowing how things should normally work and how things really are, and not being sort of swept up by a distraction or being swept away by being gullible, but it's also knowing how to respond. And that's sort of the definition. It's knowing how things really work, knowing how things really are, and knowing how to respond. And that's what wisdom is, according to Proverbs, basically. Knowing how things really happen, seeing how things really are, despite any contrary bents of information that are coming at us from all sides. We see through that, and then we know how to respond accordingly. And the wise have information, and they have moral character, but beyond that, the wise also have a quality of mind and a heart so they can act whenever the rules don't apply, and simple more information isn't going to help. That's wisdom. And it's the active reality of wisdom operating in our minds and hearts that appears to be defined by this competency to be able to deal with the realities of life. That's what wisdom is, according to Proverbs. So let's look at the second thing, our struggle, or the struggle to be wise. Not just our struggle, it's a struggle for everybody. Verses 22 through 31. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up, at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth, when there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth, before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him. Like a master workman, I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. So first off, we shouldn't forget that this is a poem. This is poetry. And in the poem, you have this thing that happens. Wisdom suddenly begins to speak for itself. I was with the Lord when the Lord made everything that was made and all that stuff. One thing, just as an aside, that I think is probably helpful to give some clarity here. This is a very unique, and I think sometimes I don't fully appreciate the uniqueness of the creation story that's given to us in Scripture. Meaning that the biblical account of creation is unique in many ways. And we've gone through this probably ad nauseum in series before. But just one point to it is that, you have this very unique concept about creation in Scripture. In Eastern societies, the material world is just, it's not seen as reality. It's sort of an illusion. The material world is not the focus of creation. The spiritual realm is the focus, and so forth. And then in Western cultures, their creation accounts of the world, it's a result always of a power struggle or a conflict, whether it's the old Norse or German or Sumerian accounts, even the Babylonian or Egyptian accounts. It doesn't matter. All you have these accounts where there's a battle, there's a debate, there's a conflict between gods and giants and this god and that god and so forth. One kills the other, and out of their body they make a group of land or something. The point is that only in the Bible do we have this account of a physical world being delighted in, not being an accident or an illusion or based on a power struggle or a conflict, but it's based on wisdom, and it's based on collaboration, and out of overwhelming delight and joy and wisdom, God created the world. God designs the world. And it's the reason in many ways that the sages of Israel, like the authors that contributed to Proverbs and other books of wisdom in the Old Testament, it's the reason that they kind of said that this is why wisdom works, because God created the world according to wisdom. There is a fabric, there is a pattern, there is a reality to all reality that's not random, and it's a way things should be. There's an order to it. There's a wisdom to it. And if wisdom made the world, then wisdom can perceive that pattern. And the pursuit of wisdom is the pursuit of understanding that understanding. And to a great degree, then to live in accordance with it. And I don't think this is a stretch for most of us. I think we understand that there's patterns to physical reality, like aerodynamics. If you follow the pattern of aerodynamics, you fly. If you disregard them, you crash. You can't pretend like they don't exist and fly anyway. And the wisdom literature of the Bible says that there's a pattern to all layers of this creation: physical, spiritual, relational. Wisdom is built into every reality, into the relational reality. And if we don't live in accordance with it, we try to operate our relationships disregarding that pattern of wisdom, our relationships will crash. If the spiritual life as well, the spiritual realm, there's a pattern to it. If we operate in our hearts and our conscience according with it, our emotions and our hopes and all, and this becomes our source of meaning in a way that is in accordance with it, we flourish. If it's not, we crash. Our life crashes. And foolishness then is going against this wisdom that God created the world with and utilized when he made everything. And going against it always leads to breakdown. It always leads to a crash. And that's the reason we have this, I think, struggle to be wise today. Because on one hand, we sort of two sides of this. We have to admit and see that there is this pattern, that God did make a world, and therefore there is a fabric to reality. And there is a way that life works best. And then secondly, on the other hand, we have to recognize that we also can't see it all. We can't know it all. There is a lot of stuff that's hidden from us. And the wisdom literature of Scripture embraces this tension. And if you read through the book of Proverbs, chapters 1 through 9, it's like a big introduction. It's all one introduction. And then chapter 10 and following, that's when you get the, like the Proverbs proper. Like where every sentence or every two lines are a little saying. But then in chapters 10 through 5, what's interesting is you see these principles, by the way, in which life normally works. It lays them out. If you work hard, you prosper. If you're lazy, you'll be poor. If you live accordance with these things, life will go well. If you're wicked, your life won't go so well. And if you raise kids according to this pattern, if you raise them rightly, when they're older, they'll love you and they'll be responsible adults. And if we have that, one of these days I'll get through puberty. But the point is, if we have that conservative bent of mind, we read chapters 10 through 15, we say, yes, that's what I'm talking about. If you work hard, you'll be okay. If you're lazy, you'll be poor. If you follow what's right and you're morally true, things work out for you. That's how you know that you're going well. But then, what happens is we dip in, we get this little wisdom, we get this little nugget, we try to apply that, we create these moral standards, and we never gain wisdom. We just end up feeling better about ourselves and feel like we're on the right path, whether we are or not. Or worse, we feel worse about ourselves because we actually never can attain the attributes and the standards that Proverbs is putting forth. But that's a sermon for another time. But if we do that, we're not reading it the way it was written, because when you get to chapter 16 after 10 through 15, you suddenly begin to see all these exceptions to the same principles that were laid out just a few chapters before of how life should work. So for example, there's a number of proverbs that say if you're living according to God's moral truths and his absolutes, you will still have a lousy life. So then some people say, though, you work hard, and there's a couple of them that say that you can still stay poor because of oppression. And then it says some people will raise their child, but when they grow up, they can still go off the rails and they can still abandon what they were taught. So now what do we do? Well, if we have just more of a liberal temperament, we'll say, look, I told you life was messy, oppression is the enemy. But here's the point. That's why we struggle to be wise. If on one hand we will not admit that there is a pattern of wisdom, a pattern to reality that we have to submit to, a way that is best for us, that we didn't design but was designed for us and written into the fabric of the very creation we live in. If we deny that and we're not willing to accept that objective truth, we're being fools. But on the other hand, if we think we can see the whole pattern, if we think if I do this, then I will get this and then I will be right, we're also being a fool. We can be a liberal fool or a conservative fool. If you're like me, you've been both. But we all lean one way or the other, by our ideology, by our temperament. Many years ago, I was at another church. I'm pretty sure I've shared this story before, but I was asked a question by somebody. I was way too young to answer this question. I did not have any wisdom. And you know that because I tried to answer the question anyway. That's how you know. But what happened was this person came up to me. We were having a Bible study, and afterward they came up and they asked a question. And the question was one of those questions that you knew was going to lead into a larger conversation. Because the question they asked was, hey, you believe everything the Bible says, right? Okay. And so I knew I was being set up for something, right? So I said, sure, what's your question? And then he went on to say Proverbs 22:6, which is right there. Train a child up in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it. That's what he said. And he's right. That's the quote. But he said that his brother was a mess. And so he said, clearly, my parents have failed. My brother's off the rails, so clearly my parents have failed. And what he went on to ask me a question that I was blown away by. But what he asked was, if I thought, again, I don't know why my opinion mattered, I was like 19, but if I thought that in light of this catastrophic, clearly a moral failure on his parents' behalf, would it be a good idea for him to write his parents off so that he would no longer be corrupted by their apparent ungodly influence? I said I needed time to think about this question, and I said, could I write a letter. And so that's what I did. I wrote a letter explaining what I thought. And I wrote some of the things we're talking about today, so maybe I haven't actually grown in much wisdom after all. But I also mentioned Proverbs 19:27, which is here, which seems to say that as a child gets older, they can still resist and stray from their parents' godly instruction. So I encouraged him to not necessarily abandon his relationships because of a perceived moral failure, which has its own issues. A couple weeks later, we were back at church, and I asked him if he wanted to sit down and chat with what he was wrestling with, and he said, "No, that's all right. I'll figure it out." I don't think he liked my letter, but that's all right. Problem is, he was very rigid. He's very legalistic. You can probably feel that from the questions he was asking. He had this firm grip on one end of the wisdom pattern. He knew there was a pattern. He knew that there was a way life should go, but he also thought that he could see all sides, that he could understand everything, and he could discern it all, that he knew how life should go, and he didn't think there would be any exceptions to the way life should work. And by the way, I'm not saying that there's exceptions to moral absolutes. Lying is always wrong, but the issue is Proverbs 12 seems to imply that if we're truthful, we'll have a better life, but then Proverbs goes on to say that there's also exceptions to that. Wisdom says this is how it should be, and it's better for us and those around us to be truthful. We'll probably sleep better if we're not liars. We'll probably lay our head down better and without lies hanging over our head. But wisdom also admits that we live in a fallen world, and we do not know everything that's going on spiritually, and there's a lot that we cannot see. So in a nutshell, if we're the kind of person who says, if I have a moral life, I'll make sure I'm right, my life will go well, we're probably a fool. Or if we're saying, I'm the kind of person, I'm going to search for my truth, I don't believe that there's some divine order that I have to submit to, then we're also a fool. Legalistic fool or a relativistic fool. But we're all foolish somewhere. And I don't think we'll ever be wise if we don't admit that. But we live in a society, I think, where we're kind of split on this, and we all struggle to be wise, myself included, and very few people appear to be inviting people to wisdom. We're all seemingly pushing each other into foolishness in our conversations, in our social media, in the news, relationally, politically, spiritually, emotionally. We struggle to be wise, either because we don't submit to an established pattern of wisdom from God that says this is how he made us to be, or we have a very simplified list of morals, and in doing so, we have become simple ourselves. So what's the solution? If we're all foolish in some way, what does growth toward wisdom look like? Let's look at this last bit, the path to wisdom. 35 and 36 says, "For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord. But he who fails to find me injures himself, and all who hate me love death." All right, let's wrap it up this way, because I think there's something very comforting here, quite comforting, but we need to look at the words of Jesus. And in case you've forgotten in the last 30 minutes what series we're in, we are still looking at the words of Jesus this summer. So we need to turn there. Proverbs is poetry, and the very basic point in many ways of this poem of chapter 8 about wisdom is that wisdom is personified. Wisdom is I, it's me, it's my. An abstract reality or an attribute in this book somehow has been turned into a person. And over again in Proverbs, wisdom is depicted as a woman who calls out to be longed for and to be desired. And here's the point. Wisdom is not so much a matter of mastering a bunch of rules, it's a love affair that we need. It is a longing that we need for wisdom. But what if this is more than just a poem? What if the wisdom of God really was a person who we could love and know, and we could get into a relationship with, and that relationship with this person would make us wise? even if we've never had wise parents or mentors, or we never had guides or the counselors that we needed, that this person would somehow move into this role of ultimate guide and ultimate mentor and ultimate counselor. Maybe we could even call them a wonderful counselor. You know where I'm going. But let me drag this out a little further. There was a lot of other wisdom literature besides what we have in our Bibles for the Jewish people in the first century that Jesus is talking to when we read the Gospels. A lot of other wisdom literature. We kind of kept a few of them in our Bibles, but they had a lot more. They knew them. They had them memorized. And one of the pieces of literature was called The Wisdom of the Son of Sirach. It's a very interesting book. It's not very insightful necessarily. It's a lot of common sense sayings. But on the whole, it is an invitation to pursue wisdom. It's worth a read if you want. The Wisdom of the Son of Sirach. But the Wisdom of the Son of Sirach in chapter 51, verses 23 through 29 says this. Draw near to me, you who are untaught. Why do you say you are lacking in these things? Why are your souls very thirsty? Put your neck under the yoke. Let your souls receive instruction. It is to be found close by with your eyes that I have see with your eyes that I have labored little and found myself much rest. That's a typical sort of invitation to wisdom you see in those books. But imagine how the listeners who would have been very familiar with this wisdom book, this particular invitation to wisdom, several centuries later would hear this from one rabbi, from one teacher who got up and said these words to them, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." You see how similar those invitations are? It's astounding. But there's one massive difference. In the Son of Sirach, it's get the yoke, which is wisdom. Get the understanding. Wisdom will give you rest. Wisdom will provide you with these things. If you labor, get wisdom and you will labor little. And Jesus says, "Come to me. Take my yoke. Learn from me. I will give you rest." This is incredible. Jesus is saying, I am wisdom. I am the wisdom of God. I am wisdom personified. That's me in Proverbs. Wisdom is ultimately not just a body of information to master it or a list of moral principles to live by. Wisdom is knowing Jesus personally in a relationship with that there's these clear benefits of wisdom that Jesus has now appropriated onto himself, and his disciples seem to have adopted this, because we see in Proverbs 8, we just read, wisdom speaking, "Whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord, but who fails to find me injures himself." John later writes in the letter 1 John, "Whoever has the Son has life. Whoever does not have the Son of God does not have life." This is poetry, of course, but it's more than poetry. It's pointing to a person. And in John's gospel, in the first chapter, the gospel opens with this section that looks like it's almost based on Proverbs 8. John, in his opening gospel, in 1:1, we read, "In the beginning was the Word." But the Greek word for word is logos, and it's a Greek word that means reason, or the underlining root, or the order of things, the reality of reality. It's the definition of wisdom. So read John 1 through 3 and verse 14, swapping that. This isn't even a paraphrase. This is just importing the definition of the word wisdom back into the verse. Look at this. "In the beginning was wisdom, and wisdom was with God, and wisdom was God. And he was in the beginning with God. All things were made through wisdom, and without wisdom was not anything made that was made. And the wisdom became flesh and dwelt among us. And we have seen his glory as of the only Son of the Father, full of grace and truth." Now, May feel like a Sunday school answer just to say, it's Jesus. But if we want to know what true wisdom is, beyond morality, beyond information and just facts, we got to get to know Jesus. And Jesus, by the way he links himself to the wisdom literature of the Jewish people, links himself to wisdom itself, the way John links him to this understanding of the reality beyond reality, the order of all things, which the Hebrews understood to be known as the wisdom of God. We have to see that the wisdom of God has been sent to us, for us, to be with us. And then Matthew 11:28 is not just a classic invitation to salvation. It's specifically an invitation to see Jesus as the wisdom that we all need. And our only hope to grow in wisdom will be to grow in a relationship with Jesus, and because for whoever finds him finds life and obtains the favor of the Lord. And that life is available because of the death of Jesus, and not just because of his death, but because he was raised again and now lives. As Jesus told us, because he lives, we can now live too. And know the wisdom of God that surpasses knowledge and goes beyond morality. And every week we gather to remember him and his life transferred to us. So we come to this table. I invite you to this table this morning to remember not just an invitation to him, but an invitation to wisdom itself, an invitation to himself. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Let's pray.